Welcome to the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. I am Dave Deacon, and this is episode 113. And man, is it packed full of science and useful information for crop and livestock producers as we're talking soil physics with Dr. Tyson Ochsner. Before we dive in, take a second and hit the subscribe button on your streaming service so you'll always be first in line when the latest Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast drops. Of course, if you hear something in this episode that you'd like to learn more about, you are always able to find resources on our website, reddirtagronomy.com. Let's kick it off with a quick trip around the table for a quick introduction of the dream team of dirt. Let's start with Oklahoma State University's Extension Precision Nutrient Management Specialist.
Fertility side note that's been really interesting to see that goes with some of the drying front is that if you look at the soil test coming back in the last month or two, is that our nitrate and sulfate levels in our surface 6 are just astronomically high, especially in those soils that are well drained.
Dr. Brian Arnell. And these?
And then our environment, we have these heavier clay soils at depth that can hold the nutrients and then cause some problems with as far as rapid infiltration of water and all that stuff. But they're built to have that lighter textured, higher organic matter soil, and when we've lost that, it was built in a millennia or more, and it's hard to get that back.
Are the golden tones of Oklahoma State University Extension Soil and Water Conservation Management Specialist, Dr. Jason Warren. And across from him is Oklahoma State University Extension Cropping System Specialist.
Our soils could be improving all the time based on what we're doing. We're just not at the time scale that we want them to do. Like Jason said at the field day in Ice Age or irrigation.
Dr. Josh Lofton. As you will hear in the second half of the episode, we do answer questions from the audience. And if you have one, jump on over to reddirtagronomy.com and leave it there, or send us an email directly, podcast@reddirtagronomy.com. We will always discuss your questions on the next possible podcast. This episode was recorded on August 8th, 2022, and unfortunately, not much has changed weather-wise in the 4 days since then, so the crop conditions in Josh's update are still right on target. So let's dive in deep into the soil science right after we get a crop update. You are listening to the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast.
You know, we had quite a bit of area get some moisture over the last 3 or so weeks, but we're going to be back up into the 90s and triple digits, and I think at this point in time that a lot of things are just past a lot of point of no return to where we'll get a on average crop. I think we're just at a point to where we're just going to get what we have. And you're seeing that if you go online, Oklahoma Hay Market or Twitter or something like that, soybeans are coming out as hay quite readily now, and any sorghum's coming out as hay and stuff like that. So I think that a lot of folks have, especially folks that have missed rains, have just flipped the switch on getting out what you can, whether that's a little bit of grain or some hay, and switching like mentality to wheat again, or winter, what they're going to do this winter, which, I mean,
there's a lot of wheat that's already up.
Is it really?
There's wheat right out of town. Everything from basically from Altus to Stillwater, you can find wheat out of the ground the entire trip.
Yeah, and at least here in Stillwater, I think it's next Thursday is going to be 97 degrees, and I think down in the Southwest is going to be in triple digits. So
that wheat will grow real fast. Huh?
I mean, so the stuff outside of Stillwater was in the ground and out of the ground in under 4 days.
Yeah,
I wouldn't doubt it.
I mean, it just blew up. But we're already getting army worm calls from the Red River North. I mean, army worms are already starting in.
Yeah. Well, at least it's out of the ground. I was poking around in some cultivated, like, continuous wheat, and, I mean, there's moisture in it where they got rain throughout the year, and they've kept it clean. But
we have a nice little cap of moisture. It's just nothing below it.
No. It's just brutal, the freaking heat. I'm tired of being hot.
Yeah, and the fact that heat dome's sneaking back in is just not going to do anything positive.
When the hell did it leave? I didn't realize it's sneaking back in. I
February.
I mean, you saw the heat cap move off and head north. What was it, like 2 weeks ago, and then it's back, and they're forecasting it to be here for 2 or 3 weeks, and then slide north, and then come back. And
I thought it never left.
Well, and they're saying this is another La Nina winter. Mm-hmm. And in years past, the La Nina, okay, correct me if I'm wrong, it's supposed to be warmer and drier. Isn't that what it's supposed to be? But it always seems like we have really cold weather and at least one or two good snow events. And that's kind of what they're predicting another La Nina for this year. So I don't you never know what it's really going to.
I don't know. When Jason had Gary McManus out at a field day we had out in the Panhandle in, what was that, February?
Yeah.
He was talking about this is shaping up to be a transitional between a La Nina and an El Nino year, because that's kind of where we are in the cycle.
Right.
But that, he talked a month later and said that's not going to happen. This is going to be like a deep La Nina year, and that's kind of what it ended up being. So, I don't know. I think, you look at the long range forecast and however much stock you want to put into that, it really, at least the ones that I've seen, it doesn't look good until about April. So, now once again, who knows what that actually means? But that we could be in for a rough couple of months, or it could just turn and. It's kind of like I told one of Brian's students.
We're talking out April, and we how much trust do we have in the 10-day? And we're talking out April.
I have a little more trust in the 6-month than I do the 10-day, to be quite honest with you. But
yeah.
But I was telling one of Brian's students, I just kind of feel it in my bones that it's either going to be a hot and dry winter or it's going to be a nasty cold winter. I think it's just an extreme.
It's like you're rolling dice and you say, I expect it to be somewhere between a 1 and a 6.
Yeah. No,
that's
I'm
what you're
saying
doing
that
right
it's
now.
going to be a 1 or a 6. I don't think 2, 3, and 4 are on my dice anymore.
So when should we really expect to start wrapping up the summer crops? As far as the harvesting goes?
Well, I mean, we've been harvesting for the better part of a month,
right?
But I mean, you'll have. Like our full season beans that we have in some of our trials around the state look rough. Our double crop beans look outstanding. But we just didn't get a whole lot of those in because when the wheat came out, because the wheat was delayed because of rain, by the time the wheat came out, most of the growers had to wait for that rain, those fields to dry up to even be able to harvest the wheat. So we missed a lot of that rain for double crop. So the double crop acres are fairly low, considering what we normally have. But those crops look relatively good. Relatively.
I'm surprised they're not dead, but it's kind of it's still amazed me. Around Stillwater, how green it still is, even though it's not a real bright green. And then the crops, some of them, depending on when they were planted and the profile they had, they don't look too bad. But it's not, they're not going to make worth much.
Yeah, the
looks are deceiving,
and that's the one thing with soybean is that they can look really good on the outside and just not be developing actual beans, and for a lot of our full crop, that's kind of the situation we're in. Is they still are holding on to good tissue, they're just not doing anything, and that's why I think most folks are going the hay route is because they do have a lot of vegetation. So I don't know. It's one of those. It's a rough one to be through. It's been a lot of just let's see what we can kind of learn from it, and I think that's a good thing. Hopefully, the winter crop and the winter wheat and any winter canola that's out there does better. I mean, we need a good one. Most of the state needs a good season. So
I'm just going to pose the question: what have you learned so far about this crop? I mean, you said that. This has been just a good learning crop. What have you taken away from it?
Well, it's talking through some of the growers that made it through 12 or 11 and 12 and 13. I take solace, and they said they sometimes didn't realize what they learned until like 2 or 3 years later. So I'm hoping that is the case. But I don't know. It's been a rough year. Just overall, I think we see in a year like this how resourceful we can be in the state, and having that cattle system for us crop guys, having that cattle in the system sometimes is a bother because we focus on the crop, but I think it's made it to where some of our growers can salvage something positive from this year. However, small that glimmer of positivity might be, but because we have cattle in our system, it's made it to where we can salvage some positivity out of it, because we can go to hay, and even though our pastures are down and our grain crop is down, we can still continue to support that system. So I mean, that's good, is that continue to be resourceful. The other thing is, Brent Rendell will be greatly appreciative that we're continuing to talk about drought on the podcast. But our first podcast, we talked about being flexible and diverse in your system, and I think this year probably really highlighted the fact that that is a benefit in this state, in this region. So to make it to where he doesn't, sass me and Brian anymore, we got to not talk about drought anymore.
Right.
But I mean, he did pose a good question on Twitter, and he'll be happy. But he asked, what was that, a month ago, 3 weeks ago, when we just were starting to think about putting wheat in the ground, how much rain would it take for you to go ahead and run the drills through the ground? And we'll bring in Tyson for this, because he's a old Oklahoma kid, and has probably helped plant a couple of wheat crops, but a bulk majority have said, I think, 1 to 2 inches or just dust it in. Didn't matter what the rain was, just throw the wheat in the ground, and we'll figure it out when we get there.
So before we bring Tyson in all the way, why don't you introduce him, talk about what he does?
Tyson does everything. It's
yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you know, but he's a pretty big deal. But so Tyson Auctioner is our in departmental is our soil physicist, and does all those things. But he's been an instrumental part in soil water relations. Not only from a typical soil physicist, but around the state. A lot of his students have worked on very applied plans on looking at soil moisture across the state and how they do. Also has had a huge impact on the mesonet system and how we kind of interpret some of the raw data that shows up on the pretty pictures that a lot of the growers see from the app. Tyson has had a hand in getting the numbers from the instruments into those pictures, and helped with the folks down in mesonet, as well as, this is why he does everything, been a big part in the rural initiative, across Oklahoma. So I'll let him kind of highlight some of those things. But, when I said he kind of does it all, he really kind of does it all. So I'll let him go from there.
Jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah.
Or master of all trades. And
I've heard of those kind of people.
Yeah.
Well, some folks may be tired of talking about drought, but the conditions are out there. You can look at those mesonet maps, percent plant available water, and you can see you got all across the north tier of Oklahoma, including the Panhandle and really the northwest quadrant. Is still at levels that would be classified as exceptional drought if we just looked at the soil moisture conditions, and so. Yeah, it's been tough, and really, if you take the southern part of the state, they were there also. Mm-hmm. They just caught a few, some rains over the last couple of weeks, which unfortunately, maybe too little, too late for some of those summer crops like you're talking about. So you drive across, I would be curious to know what percent of the cotton crop has already been insured out. It would be quite a bit of it. I don't know what that percentage is.
At least. Last time I talked to Gary, he said an alarmingly high amount.
Yeah, it's high.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is, the parts that have probably caught more consistent smaller rains. We're talking about that first tier of counties south of Kansas. Yeah. He said the cotton crop up there looks great. It's just not our traditional cotton acres that look outstanding, but. Anything that I've get, and this is old information, so this might have changed in the last couple, but he said, I was talking to Seth, and he said, the Kansas cotton crop looks pretty good, and the North Oklahoma cotton crop looks pretty decent. So, it's one of those, it's the difference. You look at Stillwater from the time we planted our soybean trials till now, you look at just total accumulation, and I think we're up at like 13 inches or something like that.
Yeah.
But like 8.5 of those came in 2 rainfall events
Yeah.
within a week of us planting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, realistically, we've had, all intents and purpose, 4 inches of total accumulated rain, whereas some of those folks, they're still dry, but they've had these little half-inch rains that have just kind of been.
I want to go off on that comment about that heavy rains. I saw some nice demos online, Tyson, that showed water infiltration, specifically in a pasture, a pasture that had decent moisture, a pasture that was relatively dry, and a pasture that was extremely dry. And it showed that extremely dry actually doesn't. You'd think it'd just suck it up immediately, that it doesn't go in. Why does the soils respond that way when they're extremely dry, that you may not get good water infiltration?
Yeah, I can believe that, and if I can put on my extension hat, which I don't actually have an extension hat, but if I put one on, I would say it depends.
Yeah, good answer.
But there's some real interesting stuff that happens to that soil when it gets extremely dry, particularly if we're talking about a soil like in a pasture or maybe a no-till where you've got a significant amount of, you've got some organic matter, you've got some crop or plant residues at the surface. And so what can happen in those situations once that gets really dry, that organic material will actually become hydrophobic. And so that happens. We can see that. I mean, I don't know if any of y'all keep potted plants in your office.
Yeah.
I do not, because they would, they'd be dead.
Brian's got a jungle in his office.
So, but if you let them get too dry, right, and then when you put that water on, you'll see it. It'll stand right on the top, right? Matter of fact, it'll make a reflection off the bottom, and you can see that because it's become hydrophobic.
It's very aggravating.
And so, to some degree, that can happen in our soils out there as well after these extreme drought events. So then you do get that water, and it's going to take some time. And so the chemistry and all the physics of that, honestly, is still an open research area. But somehow that organic matter will gradually hydrate, and it switches to some kind of different state where then it becomes hydrophilic, and then whoosh, everything goes through. So if the soil has maintained a little bit of moisture, it'll stay in that water-loving. Hydrophilic is water-loving. It'll stay in that water-loving state. So when you get the rain, boom, you get the infiltration, and we get all those benefits. We talk about no-till. Oh, it improves your infiltration and so forth. Well, it normally can do that. Yeah. But there are these exceptions after these really dry periods where you can have problems like that.
Luckily, most of our pastures, if it is hydrophobic, which means water hating, they have big enough cracks where it'll
that's the other thing. The soil cracks and down it goes. Yeah.
As we look at the rains we have, let's say we do get 2 or 3 inches, but we're dry to depth. What's that look like in the soil profile as it refills with moisture in these rain events? How far can we get? And I know it depends, but how far do 2 or 3 inches get us on a soil profile?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Or maybe the better question is, what's it going to take to get moisture back down and we start seeing these deeper mesonet sensors start to pick up good moisture?
Yeah. Well, so I'll take a stab at an answer, but first I'll tell you why my answer will be wrong off the bat. So because there's in these soils that have structure, particularly no-till or pasture soils or forest soils that have a lot of structure to them, your flow can be dominated by preferential flow through the cracks, through the root channels, through those that kind of unique areas in the profile. That can dominate, and then that can lead to deeper wetting, but incomplete wetting. So that can happen a lot. But if we had sort of uniform wetting moving down through the soil, you can kind of think about, okay, well, how much porosity is going to refill, or how much is the water content going to go up on a percentage basis, and that'll let you kind of reason through how deep it might go. So if that, let's say if we got dry soil, we get rain, and water content's going to increase by about 20% from dry. Let's say it was at 10% water content, goes up to 30%. That'd be pretty good, right? So that's a 20% increase. So 20% is 1 out of 5, right? Okay, so that means for 1 inch of rain, it's going to go 5 inches into the soil.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy.
So you can kind of think through kind of like that. So 2 inches will get you 10.
Mm-hmm.
3 inches get you 15. So you can kind of start to reason through like that, and that's just kind of a way to ballpark it.
Those numbers have always been kind of crazy to me because you'd think like an inch of rain is a lot of rain.
Yeah.
But when you have a dry soil,
Yeah.
it doesn't go very deep.
It doesn't.
And
It doesn't.
and I was it's in our jobs we get to observe this stuff, and
Yeah.
I like not recently this drought, but the last go around, we would dig pits, and there was pits where we dug right after a 2-inch rain,
Yeah.
where the profile was desiccated in 2 inches. You get
Yeah.
a foot of moisture, and like
Yeah.
what you're saying is very true.
Yeah.
I mean that's observable.
Yeah.
So if you look at, to wet it down to the 24-inch
Yeah.
sensor, or, you might be looking at 4 or 5 inches of rain to replenish that.
So to get moisture to move down, let's say we start with a completely dry profile from 0 to 24. At what point can water move? How much of those pores need to be filled above to move down? Is it that 30% you can get moisture down, or do you have to fill more of them? I think of the leaching where I need to fill more pores to push it down.
Yeah.
And so at what moisture content can we get downward movement?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Let's
So
say it's a silt loam.
Yeah, when we talk about this idea of field capacity, right, which
Yeah.
is this idea of, well, if we have the water above a certain level, then that whatever is excess above that is going to drain downward. Okay, well, that's just not a true concept from the start. It's not how the soil works, but it can be, again, a useful approximation, right? Because what in reality you get that you have that. Let's say you get that 2 inches of rain. It goes into those top 6 inches or whatever of the soil. It's if there's that dry layer underneath, it's going to redistribute. And so it's just a matter of time. If we can really fill it up above the so-called field capacity, let's say we fill that profile, that surface layer up to 40%, well, then we're going to see the redistribution happen faster. Okay, but if it only fills up to, let's say, 30% or 25%, it's still going to redistribute downward.
Yeah.
This is going to get so slow we're going to get tired of watching it.
Yeah.
We're going to think it didn't happen. And it will. We just got to give it enough time.
So let's say that's really fun. So if we say that we have time to go down, but if we're still holding 90-degree temperatures and we still have
then you're losing it
evaporation
at the top. Yeah.
and so now you have a battle between going up and going down.
Yeah, and so the newer kind of concepts is it used to be they'd say, well, if we get above this certain water content, we get above a water content of 35%, we're above field capacity, and the rest of that will drain. And we can still use those kind of approximations, but the better ones now are based on the drainage rate. So you could compare. You can say, well, okay, at this water content, our downward drainage might be, let's say, 1/4 of an inch a day, okay, which would be a pretty good downward drainage rate.
Yeah, that's quite a bit.
But my evaporation could be more than it could be half an inch a day.
Yeah.
And so then then I'm not gaining anything. So that has to factor in. And when you think about how that water is going to move down.
Yeah. Well, and to go back to something you mentioned, and because I've seen this where we're dry like this, and we're like maybe we're growing a summer crop, and then we harvest it and we're getting ready to grow wheat or canola or whatever. And I've seen it in canola more because it's pretty sensitive to like germination moisture and it's planted shallow. But where you have a desiccated profile, like Brian said, and you get like 1.5 inches of rain, you're going to moisten that 6 inches, and then it's going to start pulling from both ends. And that pull is like if you have a dry clay loam, it's going to pull pretty hard into the subsoil, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so, and that's what I've seen a lot of that. And I always tell people as like the problem we have is like you say, 1 inch of rain doesn't go very far, and you've got a hungry 6-foot profile or whatever that can pull it down, right?
Yeah.
And it's just crazy.
Yeah,
how hard it is to get back.
Yeah, it is hard, and so that's one thing that we have. One of the first products that we worked on for the Mesnet after I came here were these plant available water products, and so you can look at the 32-inch plant available water map there on the Mesonet, and you can see a lot of the state has got less than an inch of plant available water,
or is that just
in the top 32 inches from 0 to 32?
Wow.
They're storing less than an inch of available water for the plants.
And just to give it. And for perspective, when they're full, what are some of those numbers?
Yeah, so that you could have that when it's full, that could store up to 6 or 7 or 8 inches.
See, that's what's crazy.
And some of these places are only holding an inch.
Yeah.
Now that's going to vary, of course, depending on your soil. So your sand is going to store very little, and your finer textured soils are going to store more. But it helps. So it helps sometimes to look at that. Sometimes you look at soil moisture as a percentage, and that's helpful. Sometimes we look at it as in inches of plant available water, and that can help to put it in the context of rainfall.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically these soil profiles, a lot of them across the state, still need several inches of rain before they're going to start to be in a good condition again.
Yeah.
And that's going to be better served as a little bit at a time, not just a flood.
We're going to need sizable, slow rainfall events. So when we say a little bit, and you're right, so a little bit at a time meaning the rate, like at a slow rate, but also we want big events.
Mm-hmm.
Like so if we get half an inch, well, let's say a quarter of an inch a day, that is not going to help us very much, because we're going to be losing a bunch of that to interception by the grasses out there in the pastures or by the crop residue, and it'll just be gone. And you can have a quarter inch every day and never gain anything. And so we need those rains that are prolonged rains that bring 1 to 2 inches of water over the course of 12 or 24 hours, and then you're really doing some good.
So, little fertility side note that's been really interesting to see that goes with some of the drying front is that if you look at the soil test coming back in the last month or two, is that our nitrate and sulfate levels in our surface 6 are just astronomically high, especially in those soils that are well drained and pulling up from the depth. So if you got to think, if it's pulling up from 3 foot deeper and even 4 foot deeper in a well drained soil, our wheat crop does not typically root to 3 or 4 foot deep or 5 to get a lot of the nitrogen that's down at that depth. And so we've seen this upward movement of our mobile nutrients like nitrogen and sulfur. So guys are getting soil tests back, and they're typically seeing where they would expect 15 or 20 pounds. They had a bad crop last year, but you have this deep, they're seeing 60, 70, 80, and 100 pounds of nitrogen in the surface and 20, 30 pounds of sulfur, and it's this drying effect to depth. Problem is, if we do get a deep profiled filling rainfall, it's going to push those mobile nutrients right back down to the depth. And so that's where the crop rotation with some deeper rooted crops to tie in some canola, some cotton, some sorghum that typically pulls from depth, it helps us take advantage of that deep nitrate and sulfate.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And you get as we get in those warmer conditions and dry conditions, we can have some accumulated mineralization, and so you tend to see that these higher nitrate concentrations after drought. And as a matter of fact, you can sometimes even see that in the groundwater. So you can see those nitrate concentrations start to creep up following a drought event.
Our organic matter's basically been setting, so we have an accumulation of nitrogen from the mineralization that wasn't used because it was dry, but you also have organic matter's just been sitting there, not breaking down because it's been so dry for the microbes to get. So we have this kind of a catch in our organic matter cycling, our release and immobilization that's occurred during these dry summers.
Something that you mentioned earlier about the wheat that's been planted so far and how dry it's been. There have been years whenever we've had a lot of moisture at planting and the rooting boy, you catch the way I really hit that T in rooting.
I thought you said routine, like a routine.
Right? Yeah,
do your
kind of sound
coffee
like
every
that.
morning.
But the rooting of the
Alright.
plant was a lot more shallow,
Mhm.
but with it being dry like this, they're having to the roots are having to fight for moisture and go to depth, and that in some ways, especially if dual purpose wheat, which is what would be planted right now, that's kind of an advantage whenever you do have the animals pulling on it.
You'll my understanding as a soil scientist. So we have, by the way, 4 soil scientists
And
from Oklahoma,
Dave.
and Dave sitting at
And
the table.
Dave.
Not a single one of us have a plant background really, but the challenge with that, so when you have a little bit of stress, moisture stress, nitrogen stress, those roots will explore, but to moisture. So if we have this zone of moisture and then dry below that, they're not going to really extend into
Right.
that dry.
Yeah.
Once they hit that dry layer, they'll tend to. So we still need that moisture at depth. They're typically looking for moisture at depth and finding it. So right now we're sitting with a band of moisture on our soil with nothing below it on a lot of our soils. Not all of them, but a lot of our soils have this surface to anywhere between 6 to 12 inches that have some kind of moisture, and then below that we're pretty dry.
And luckily Tyson's able to bring up the mesonet and show us exactly what the moisture is at depth.
Yeah. Like that's the biggest thing is that we always talk about the rooting mass after like a year like this year to where we had significant early season wet weather, and we always say that either because of anaerobic conditions or because of no need to go down further that the roots did not develop. But it can be just as bad in a dry early season that we just don't develop roots, because like Brian said, once it hits some dry soil, it's going to need to hit some moisture sometime sooner. Those roots are just going to die back and just calcify in there, and they just won't do anything. So they're then structured roots. They're not actual pulling roots any longer. So it's a fight, and it's one of those things that when we plant and we're this dry and we have a cap, we got to keep that cap and then slowly extend that cap. We can't rely on, we have 12 inches of moisture right now, and then maybe we have some more at 5 foot. I don't know if we do or not, but if we do, I mean, that's a big gap to stretch. So, right now we're working with the cap, and that's basically all we have.
Yeah, that I think Dave is on target though. That there is that possibility that there can be a benefit to drier conditions at planting for wheat, and wheat is such a unique crop that you've got that really long growing season.
Yeah.
You've got that dormant period in the winter. You've got soil temperature playing a key role. You've got soil moisture, being a limiting factor there. But I think you're right. There is a possibility for the wheat crop to actually benefit from moderate moisture stress when it's really young.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we'll see any of that this year, I don't know. But we can be optimistic, right?
Right.
I mean, that's what keeps people farming is optimism.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and traditionally, we're in September. October tends to. We get to state fair season, and then it's going to rain. Usually, 9 times out of 10, 7 times out of 10, it's going to rain around state fair season. 50-50. No more than 40. But I mean, this is traditionally one of the what is it? It's the third wettest time of the year whenever it comes to rainfall in Oklahoma, if I remember.
It's our this is we well, it depends where you're at in the state.
Exactly.
Some parts of the state have 2 peaks in rainfall. Others just have 1. But so it's interesting. If I just back up a little bit in the growing season, you go back to mid-July. Remember July 15th, July 20th, July 25th. I mean, almost the entire state was in really bad condition. I mean, it was bad. And I think we were sort of potentially getting into a 2012 kind of drought event. We were at
Yeah.
that borderline. And the difference being between this year and 2012 is that this year, if we could call them fall rains, it's not fall yet, but late summer rains, I guess would be a better name for them. It started on July 29th this year. That's when we got that first rain after what seemed like forever, was on July 29th.
Yeah.
And in 2012, that didn't come until about August 15th or 17th or somewhere around there. It was a couple of two and a half weeks later. And that 2.5 week difference, I mean, was absolutely devastating in 2012. So that was devastating for our summer crops. I mean, you can remember, everybody lived through that, remembers what that was like. And it was devastating in terms of wildfire. Mm-hmm. We had huge wildfire outbreaks across the state that started on August 3rd of 2012. And that stuff, and so I think there's, I mean, you can't redo history, but I think we were probably sort of days away from disaster this year. And those rains came. Now, they didn't come everywhere, and somebody's going to listen and say, well, I didn't get any rain. And I know, but I'm talking generalities across the whole state. I think that what happened about the 29th and following is what put us in a little better shape as a state now than we were in 2012.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, it's unrelenting heat, but I don't think I can't remember the temperatures, but it's just unrelenting this year, and it was unrelenting then. And then, I've just, every time we see rain, broad sweeping rain, I always think back to those 11 and 12, because there you'd see rain coming, and it just would never, it just evaporate. And that's why every time, even if we're not getting rain exactly where we want it as individuals, at least it's raining somewhere. It's with the unrelenting heat. It just hadn't been enough, but golly, it could be so much worse.
Yeah. Well, so Tyson, let me ask you a question, because we were getting really to some really sour points a couple weeks ago, and then we got some rains. Some people got more than others, and a lot of those deep red drought conditions on the drought monitor kind of started to fade away. But if we go right down here to Cow Creek Bottom, that has continued to dry, in that now I actually got out of the car after we talked, and I walked, and there's a good portion of that surface water that is never built back up, even with some of these summer rains. So why are some areas surface water still continuing to dry, even though our drought monitor index over the last 2 weeks, I think, has gone down, or improved, I think is what they call it?
Yes, that's a great question. And so let's start off with what the drought monitor is. The drought monitor is a fantastic tool that pulls together a lot of weather data from across the nation. It pulls together some remote sensing data looking at the vegetative condition across the nation. And then it pulls together a lot of expert opinion. That folks say, well, I kind of think this area is worse than that area because of maybe they're talking about the surface or the ponds or the soil moisture or the stream flow. They look at all these different indicators, and they try to come up with one integrated measure of drought. But as you're pointing out, that's not exactly how drought works. It's hard to integrate, because what you can have is what we call meteorological drought. So that's where, hey, our precip is below average.
Yeah. So
that's meteorological drought. But, below average precip in April may not hurt us that much, right? So below average precip isn't always a great indicator. And so that's why we're very blessed in Oklahoma to have these soil moisture data, right, that can help us monitor drought from a soil standpoint. And that's going to be the key factor for agriculture. It's going to be the key factor for like our pastures, our forests, these kind of things that rely on that soil moisture. But then there's another stage of drought that's going to be, what's the impact on surface water? And I'm kind of going through these in chronological order, because it's the precip deficit that's going to be impacted first, and then you're going to see the impacts in the soil, And then you may see impacts in the surface waters, a Cow Creek, the pond. My dad down at Chattanooga has built a new pond. He's like, when is this thing going to fill up? It's like, well, got all this rain, but got 5 inches, but didn't fill the pond up.
It's the Optima of Chattanooga.
Yeah, exactly. It's like Lake Optima Junior. So you got that surface water drought that's on different time scale, and then below that you've got a groundwater drought condition that can develop and can persist over even longer terms. And so when we start to get relief, that relief also has to propagate through all those levels. And so I think as a land manager, as a resource manager, you got to kind of be aware of which levels are important to your operation. So if you rely on surface water or groundwater, you got to have a longer term perspective.
I notice those ponds out west. I mean, there's a couple pockets where there's ponds there, but there's not many. There's a lot of dry ponds out west, and so I know we've been talking a lot about cattlemen and having hay, but cattle and hauling water is a big
thing. Yeah.
Well, and the interesting thing to me is that whenever you get relief, if you will, it comes so rapid. But then, like you said, once you get drought set in, just a normal rainfall pattern just takes a long time to do these multi-step processes. Because I can remember back in 19, driving from here to Enid in March of 19 looks a lot different than May of 19 after we got those 17 inches, because there's new ponds, new surface water that was not there in March that was there in May after we had those rains. And it's just it's that rapid on these flooding events or these high moisture events. But once you get drought, that's a long process to come back from.
It really is. That's a great point that you're making. If we look at, if you go back to the 11, 12, 13, 14 drought, really that drought I would really categorize that as really spanning those 4 years.
Easy.
However, 2013 was average precip. 2013 was a fantastic year for grass. I mean, but because it was average, it didn't make up all those deficits that we'd had for the prior 2 years. And then 2014 was below average again, and so here's the drought, all just instantly reappearing again. It never really went away. Average year isn't going to replace it, but so it took 2015 coming along, about May. First week of May 2015, the rains came somewhere around in there, and just and it was a downpour. In 2015, ended up being like record-setting precip in a lot of places. That's what ended that drought. And so, what's it going to take to end this one?
Well, and I also find it kind of interesting, because we get these monitor indexes come out, and everybody's like, oh, well, this was a drought relief rain, and I'm like, like you said, there's different ways to measure that. And from a crop perspective, I just look at the crops, and, having 3 inches, but it still be a whole week of 100-degree weather. It's like, that's not a drought relief. We're still right in the middle of it. So that's a great point. And we need better ways, so that we're actually working on this. Of course, now gets to our research. There you go. We're working. Well, maybe we'll appreciate it moving away from drought.
But I mean, working on ways to. We need sort of appropriate integrated measures of drought impacts on our crops. And the drought monitor is certainly not designed for that. It's designed for a very good and useful purpose, but it's not designed to be an integrated measure of drought impact on crops. It was never designed for that.
While the doctors take a quick break, I want to remind you that you can head over to reddirtagronomy.com to find all of the resources Dr. Tyson Auctioner mentioned in the first half, along with a place for you to send the group a question. If you're more of an emailer, drop us a note, podcast@reddirtagronomy.com, or you can even send us a direct message or a tweet. Our handle is reddirtag on Twitter. Let's jump back into the podcast with a question from a listener about rebuilding topsoil. You are listening to the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. We're going to the mailbag. Special thanks to Bill Bremer for sending an email to us. And we didn't do it last time because our soil expert was out doing extension work across the state and couldn't make time for us. And we understand that. I mean, you got to Yeah, you got to go with what the business card says, so you got to do that.
Yeah.
But Bill emailed us and he said, this was kind of nice. He said, love the podcast. That's nice.
Oh, that's a nice start.
Hey, yeah, thanks, Bill. That it really made all of our day. Do any of the past podcasts talk about any farming practices that actually build up the soil as opposed to just maintaining the current level of topsoil? Is that even a concern in today's farming? Take it and run with it, Jason.
Mr. Guru.
Yeah.
I mean, for the last my whole career, we've been talking about adopted no-till, and we get crop rotations and cover crops, and all these things can impact the soil. When I look at all the things I've seen, the number one benefit of no-till is the residue that keeps the ground covered, that it helps us with infiltration, and kind of can manage some evaporative water losses. And when you look at, and Tyson, he's done a lot of this too, but when you look at the effect on the soil structure character and the organic matter and things, a lot of that happens in the top couple inches. And you can see, macro porosity improvements compared to like cultivation, where that top couple inches can kind of serve to hold the water there long enough to where it can infiltrate through some of these macro pores, whether they're worm cast or root channels or cracks in the ground or whatever. But it's hard to measure a lot of these things. And when you talk about building the soil, if you want to build the soil, plant grass and don't graze it, right? And you will accumulate to deeper effects, you would hope, these improvements in soil character, but it takes a long time to accumulate soil. Another way, if you want to really beef up the soil, is irrigate it, because irrigating it will take your primary productivity from whatever it is based on rainfall, and it'll put it on overdrive. Irrigated corn in the Panhandle makes massive amounts of tons of organic matter, and you can see that in the soil compared to the dryland conditions. You do that anywhere in the state, and you're going to accumulate organic matter, and you're going to accumulate it to greater depths, but that's going to use a lot of water. And so to build the soil, it's tough. We can improve it, but it's really hard to get a deep influence on our soils.
Yeah, you got to think about the soil also, especially when it comes to organic matter, as a feedback loop. The feedback loop is the biomass produced to improve porosity, to put more roots in the soil, to put more organic matter in the soil. We need more production. So anything that feeds a production increase is going to feed that. But we also have removal. So what Jason said about put it to grass and never graze it, if we're pulling beef off, we're pulling protein off. That's the whole point. That protein is nitrogen, it's got calcium, it's got potassium, it's got carbon that is pulled off. All those things are to go back in. So we have this feedback loop. We need increased productivity so that we can increase the plant biomass produced that can go back into the system, but we also have to manage how much is being removed or not being removed. So if you're grazing, leave more stubble, graze it less intensely, leave more carbon. So we have this thing, and the water is a big impact. If we have more water now, we have more. On the other side, we also have to think if we have if we go back to Libby's law of the minimum and the barrel staves, what's our minimum? Is it water? Okay, now we remove water, and we have this ability to grow more biomass because we have more water. Then our next limiting factor is nitrogen, because to build organic matter, you have to have the C to N ratio proper. So if we want to be building organic matter, we're building carbon. That's what everybody thinks, but organic matter is carbon and nitrogen. So we have to make sure there's an additional amount of nitrogen available to go back into the system to have that organic matter and have the plants grow more to put more back. And so it's this constant feedback loop of inputs. If we want to build, we have to have an input there to create that additional carbon and nitrogen going into the system. That input would be water, be nitrogen, be lack of removal.
Yeah,
but I think the one of the biggest things, as Jason kind of alluded to it, just a minute ago, is that we've been doing a lot of these things for a number of years, the soil health movement, which is, is no different than the conservation movement. It's just focused on, instead of minimizing soil loss, it's improving soil that's in place. I think a lot of the things we've always done to do this, to do the soil, minimize soil loss, improve soil quality, it's just back, 40 years ago when this all started, we couldn't measure it, or we didn't understand it, and we still really don't understand a lot of these measures that do the quality perspective. We can do easy things like, are you increasing soil organic carbon? Are you increasing organic matter? But whenever you get into the microbial sector, the living sector of the soil, we have a lot of measurements, but we don't understand what they're doing. And the easy one was CO2 evolution, because that gives an indication of how many microbes you have out there and how active they are. Well, talking to Lisa Foltz, which is one of the microbiologists that I work with in cover crops, is she says, sure, I can put, we talked about this a couple podcasts ago, I can put sugar out there, and I can really pump up the CO2 product, or I can do even worse, I can till the ground. I can really increase CO2, but is that improving the quality? Just because you're making your microbes work doesn't mean you're actually doing anything beneficial. And so, you have to have increased microbial biomass paired with increased functionality of those microbes. Well, we don't have a direct measurement for that. And so, it's, we need to increase diversity. Well, that's like a $60 soil test right there. So it's hard to do these things, and I think a lot of the things to improve quality we're doing. The biggest thing I don't like to see right now is we're sometimes sacrificing the keeping soil in place to keeping the quality in perspective. And it doesn't matter if we're improving the soil if that soil is lost. It's kind of like the whole mental experiment is if you stick a hole in a bucket and then you spend all this money trying to fill this bucket up, but you're losing all the water out the bottom of the bucket because there's a hole in it. It doesn't really matter that we're improving soil because it's eventually going to be lost. So until we stop the leaks, improving the consistency of the soil needs to be one of those things to where we stop the leaks and then improve it. And we can, once again, a lot of our practices do them both at the same time, but we need to stop the leaks. We can't do things like till the ground to plant cover crops to improve the soil, because tilling the ground is doing the opposite of what we want to do. So it's better to have really nice residue sitting on the ground, protect the soil, improve it, maybe a little slower than the cover crops will, but we don't have the risk of losing it, which I think ultimately is one of the bigger challenges. And we talked about in the cover crop field day we just had that the number one pollutant is turbidity in a lot of our surface waters. And so great to improve it, but if we're tilling a ground to plant cover crops to improve our soil, but we increase turbidity in our surface waters because we're tilling the ground, we're not really doing anything.
Well, and one of the things about like the soil health parameters that we have in this country is there are a lot of them are Corn Belt centric, and what I mean by that is they look at the Corn Belt soils as the ideal, high organic matter, highly fertile, deep, and they were created that way based on their position in the world and the climate and everything that they were, and we're not in that position. So to evaluate our soils, relative to the Corn Belt is not even fair. And then when you look at going from say point A to point B and the like improvements in soil, you have to look at different things, because for a good example that's always interesting to me is we always want to build organic matter and increase microbial activity. Well, those are counterintuitive or counterproductive, because if I'm increasing biological activity, I'm consuming more organic matter, so my organic matter is not going to increase. And that's a challenge here because we're so warm, and we never really get freezing temperatures in most of the state below 4 or below 2 inches. It just doesn't freeze, and so those microbes are always churning. But yet the processes that are contributed to the organic matter increasing are still occurring. They're just burning up all the organic matter, and so you can see improved, macroporosity. You can see improved aggregation in the near surface. It just doesn't penetrate that deep because that organic matter is not really staying around long enough at depth.
Yeah.
But when you dig down, and we'll have platy structure in some of these silt loam long-term no-till soils in the top few inches, but you'll have root channels going right through it, and those soils are productive. So there's got to be something going on. So it's just a tough deal, and we've and as far as like all the microbiological diversity and all that stuff, as an extension specialist, I'm just still waiting on the research guys to figure all that out.
Well, and so I want to go back to the thing, because we all learned it in our first soils class we went to. Jeff Addy said it many times whenever I was taking him. We can lose an inch of soil in one thunderstorm. How long does it take to gain an inch of soil?
I don't know.
I mean, depending on hundreds or thousands of years. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about a long term. So, once again, I go back to the thing of making sure your soil's in place, and kind of like what Jason said, depending on what your factor is that you're looking at, our soils could be improving all the time based on what we're doing. We're just not at the time scale that we want them to do.
Yeah.
And it's, in Oklahoma, I want to increase my 1% organic matter soil to 5%.
Idiot.
Well, I hope you have a couple of lifetimes to do said things, or like Jason said at the field day, an ice age or irrigation. So,
well, and just thing that popped into my mind is like in Oklahoma, and I tell this story from time to time. There is a soil mapping unit called the Renfro, and there are some conservationists and soil scientists that would say that should be the state soil instead of the Port Silt loam. Port Silt loam is nice, and it's kind of a corn belt looking soil because it's bottomland black, can be black down to, or dark brown to a couple feet. So that's a state soil, right? But the Renfro is the most extensive, highest acreage soil mapping unit in the state, and most of it is mapped as an eroded Renfro. Mm-hmm. And the reason it's a eroded Renfro is because it's generally got some slope to it, and it's got as much as 50% clay content at depth within the subsoil. And under grassland conditions, it's very productive grassland soil. That's what it is. It's a prairie within an area that stretches from like Blackwell down to the Red River. But that soil is most commonly the challenge when cattlemen call me and say that their Bermuda grass is not doing very good. I'll look up at a mapping unit and it's a Renfro. And it's not just the Renfro, it's the eroded Renfro. Because the beauty of that soil at settlement is it had a foot of silt loam on top of it. And then because of the clay loam and slope, or the clay at depth and the slope, that silt loam washed away when they were growing cotton, for instance, in Payne County. And that soil has probably not been in crop production in a lot of places if it's an eroded Renfro for 70 years. And it's still not very productive on the Bermuda grass side of things because it has very little surface, that's because it's been lost, and now they're trying to grow grass in a heavy clay that's very near the surface. And so that tells you 60, 70 years of grass under grazing or haying, and that soil's still not recovered because it's got to get another foot of silt loam on it.
You totally described my land, because I was actually thinking about eventually putting Bermuda grass on it, but that's exactly what it was. I mean, 60 years ago they were planting cotton on it, and they couldn't get cotton on it, and so the folks said, "Love grass, do love grass," and that's what it was, and for a number of years, and then cedar trees, and then but we've brought it back to hopefully eventually pasture, but with the expectation of possibly doing Bermuda. We'll have to have you guys out there to take a look, but I'm afraid to plant Bermuda after hearing what you said about that, because
you can do it. I mean, it's just not as going to be as productive as the native, like what's called a Renfro,
right? Where
you've got a foot of silt loam on top of a clay.
Yeah,
because that's a good system. The silt loam allows for the absorption and movement of water and roots into that profile, and then that clay loam can hold a mountain of water. But once it's dry, you're done. And if you put that at the surface, then it has a less conducive environment for water, air, and root movement in that clay versus the silt loam that was what's on it. And that's why I get those phone calls. Is they're like, what can I do? Well, the first thing you got to do is let that recover and get some, surface biomass to where it can grow roots in that harsh environment.
Yeah.
But if you treat it like you would treat something that's of better physical properties, then you're not going to be happy with it.
Well, so to go back to the question is, what practices can we do to improve? And I think there's a lot of things. Depending on what type of system you're in, there's a lot of practices that you can do. Oftentimes, the things that we're doing that are conservation-minded are going to be soil health or soil improvers. Sometimes you just have to, do exactly what Brian was talking about, less outputs of that system and let that cycle more. The more outputs you do, we're still improving soil, so we're talking beef or hay bales or something like that. We're still improving soil quality. It's just going slower. If we minimize those outputs, like lower our stocking rate, decrease the amount of residue we take off, you're going to, economically, you might go a little bit lower, but that soil quality perspective, you're going to increase that speed a little bit. You're not going to do any, I don't want to say you're not going to do any better. You're just speed of what you're doing it can potentially. And with that, I'll stop talking. So we can get back to Tyson.
Yeah, we need.
I want to get to the research.
This is a great question, and I kind of picked a note in Bill's question, if I understood it correctly. I think he said about build. He didn't want to just maintain; he wanted to build. And I took it to mean as like he wanted more topsoil.
Yeah, that's very hard to do.
And so I think. I mean, that's a good thing to want, but I think it's just so helpful to go back to, like you said, about the rainfall. Think about these landscapes, okay? And think about these grassland landscapes. These things have been here for millennia. Before
we have one of the
came.
oldest landscapes in
very,
the
very
United
old
States,
landscapes. These
like
things
in
have been here a
Central
long time.
Yes.
So you go into our upland environments. How deep is the soil going to be? In the undisturbed. Upland environment,
okay,
undisturbed upland environment. If you could find one, it's thousands and thousands and thousands of years old, and it's got maybe 2 feet of soil.
Maybe I was thinking 18.
Maybe 3 if we are in a really good spot.
Yeah.
Okay, and that has taken that system ages and ages to build that much soil in this environment. Those upland positions that we farm, they are mainly erosional positions.
Yeah.
They mainly lose soil, not gain.
Even under vegetation.
And so if you're going to build soil, you can build it at the top or you can build it at the bottom. And if you build it at the bottom, you're talking about geologic timescales for that rock to weather. And so you're going to build at the top. You got to add mass at the top. And pretty much. Well, you can do that. Like Jason said, you can take a small area of that land, you can irrigate it so that you dramatically increase the productivity, and then that will start to add mass at the top. Or you can just start hauling in, beef manure or something to a small part of land and don't let it run off, and you can slowly build it. But apart from that, you're not going to build topsoil in any meaningful way. Maybe if you're in a depositional landscape, you're going to look like you're building topsoil. You're really just catching it from your neighbor's farm. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that you got to think through that.
Transfer of land without
you got to think about a basic mass balance here.
I'm glad you brought this up, Tyson, because I was talking to some NRCS guys a couple weeks ago, planning on some stuff. And, a lot of the silt loams, and we don't really think about it, but what they suggest is a lot of the silt loam caps that we have on what we'd call residuum soils or old alluvium soils, which residuum soils are built from rock and alluvial soils are built from sediment that would have been washed down during multiple ice ages and stuff like that. But what they say about the silt loam cap is a lot of that is loess or wind-blown material.
Yes.
And
it's not native to the site.
So it's being deposited over geologic time on this heavy clay material that was then deposited either as the decomposition of bedrock or when we were underwater, or the alteration of the alluvium or whatever that was formed. But this landscape is extremely old, and so when you think about building soil, I'm glad Tyson made that. Is the way, you have the horizons, and an ideal soil, you've got a nice loam at the surface that's good and conducive for root growth and all those good things. And then our environment, we have these heavier clay soils at depth that can hold the nutrients and then cause some problems with as far as rapid infiltration of water and all that stuff. But they're built to have that lighter textured, higher organic matter soil, and when we've lost that, it was built in a millennia or more, and it's hard to get that back.
Yeah, and so I wanted to. Well, I have often told myself what you said. And I still kind of want to believe it, that if we took that land, put back to grass, that we can at least build carbon up in that system again.
Yeah.
But I tell you, I've seen a study not recently here where they assessed the land that went back into CRP nationwide.
What'd they say?
They found that there was essentially no carbon gain.
Yeah. It's kind of fascinating given what's going on in the world today.
And so, or to bring it closer to home, looking at we have sampled across all our. David's cracking up now, so we're gonna. He's like, "Oh man, they're stepping in it deep now."
He knows Jason's about to get wound up. That's what he's seeing.
We did a study. So you guys, one of you guys explain this to me because you're all smarter than me. So we sampled at all these mesonet sites, and other folks had done it before us. We had like a 10-15 year period between sampling at the Oklahoma mesonet sites. Those are under grass generally, warm season or improved, Bermuda or native grasses mainly, and comparing across the two sampling times, we didn't see any significant change in the soil organic carbon levels, but what we saw was a redistribution. So that there's actually, at the more recent sampling, we had a little bit higher concentration of organic carbon near the surface, and we actually had lost organic carbon at depth. Now, we've seen that going on in cropland. We know that can happen when we switch to no-till. We can gain at the surface and lose at depth.
Very easy.
But here's what we found. It's happening in our Oklahoma grasslands. Now, somebody tell me why that's happening, because I have no idea. I mean, I have ideas, but I don't know if any of them are true.
I don't know. The only thing that comes to mind is just a long-term history of the landscape where we were much cooler and wetter during the last ice age and the mini ice age and stuff, and that we've been warming up, and then you add climate change, we maybe warming up more. But I think you would think, and I'm not a geologist, maybe we should get some geologists in here, but it's just... It's weird.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of data out there when people look at it unbiased, when they're not trying to see something and they look at long term, and that's a cool thing. We're getting along in the tooth, Tyson, is that we've got data from 10, 15 years ago from deep cores. We can look at some of the stuff from the mesonet. You can start looking at the literature where they've sampled this over the last 20 years, and I think it's pretty common across the country, right?
Yeah. It's more, the more we look at these deep soils, we're seeing that they tend to be losing carbon, and we don't know why.
Yeah. And even when we did, even my predecessor, Jim Stigler, and he left almost 16, 17 years ago. Back in the 80s, he did a lot of assessment, side-by-side assessments of CRP ground versus cultivated ground, and he did see an accumulation of organic carbon compared to the cropland that was cultivated. The expectation is we probably achieved a steady state carbon content fairly rapidly.
We have.
I don't know.
Well, so you said there was a redistribution, but then you said there was net loss. Is there a net loss, or is it solely just moving it around?
If I just talk about the mesonet sites that we sampled across the state, there was no net change across the profile as a whole. It was just there was higher carbon concentrations near the surface and decreased concentrations at depth. So that's like that profile is adjusting to something, but I don't know what.
And so a little side note is if you only sample 6 inches, we've gained organic matter.
Right, exactly. You would go out and say, hey, look, we're gaining organic matter, but it wouldn't be true. No. It'd make a great press release, though.
What grass species do we are they? Could it be grass species that there's more of the smaller root, and we just have that slight change in more of the shallow-rooted species, more of the Bermuda grass and types, and not some of that? But I mean, if we have carbon, so the deal is if we have carbon at depth, organic carbon, and we go back to the palm and mayom and stuff that we had with Dr. Yilling, which I've already forgotten what they mean, but the particulate carbon and the mineralized carbon. If we have that carbon at depth and we're not adding roots to that depth, if we're not growing roots down and redistributing, then that carbon in time will mineralize and will break down and will be redistributed to the surface because we have that upward or downward movement. So to me, if we're not putting roots down there, then we're not adding carbon, so you can only lose. But you've done some switchgrass work that even with deep roots, you still have a redistribution, right?
Yeah, I don't know. We need to, that'd be something to put on our to-do list, is go back and assess some of these long-term switchgrass plots, because I don't think we've done that. So.
Like we have one set of those switchgrass plots that were established in 2009 and 10 here in Stillwater, and we sampled those back when pre-establishment. And I guess a guy ought to.
Yeah, we ought to go take a look,
because that rooting structure might be different enough and more massive enough to see something.
But then that's the thing, There's a big argument, and I've got a student that's actually looking at some of this, is quantifying organic matter and how you deal with root mass. A lot of the accumulation of organic matter, if you, depending on how you analyze it and pick out the roots and all this stuff, it could just be root mass. And is that organic matter? So some people would say, no, that's biomass underground, and you've got to remove that from the...
So we've talking a little bit about the mesonet, and, you were talking about crop assessment before. You guys are looking at a new... I don't want to say a new and different, but maybe an improvement on some of the weather stations through the Kronos system that you're looking at that can take not only what we traditionally think of in a mesonet, but some extra readings as well. Yeah, we are we're working on it. So in the Rain-Fed Agriculture Innovation Network project, we are starting to develop these new cropland monitoring stations, which we call Kronos. And the goal here is to be able to provide managers, producers, farmers, with information about their soil moisture condition, their crop development, and their local weather for that particular field. So it's an integrated soil, plant, atmosphere monitoring system, and we're trying to optimize this thing specifically to use in cropland, so that after planting, you've got a station that you can pick up, take it out where you want it in your field, and set it down, leave it there till harvest or whatever, pull that thing back out, and you've got a source of basically real-time information on what's happening in that field. So that's the goal of that effort. When I think the crop monitoring is really interesting. You guys have been pursuing. It's not just as easy as just throwing a camera out there. It's a lot of things that go into the getting the right picture for crop monitoring. Yeah. So if I walk through those pieces of that system, and I'll come to the crop, I want to hit on the soil part briefly, because that's part of the research as well. We're monitoring, these stations are monitoring the soil moisture conditions, but there's no sensor in the ground.
Nice.
Right, so everything is above ground, it's non-contact, and the sensor that we're using is responding to soil moisture across the entire field. It's not just a single point. And the way that it does that is using a technology that's based on measuring cosmic ray neutrons. And so if we've got a couple hours, I can really unpack what cosmic ray neutrons are, and we can talk about a lot of physics. Or maybe I can leave it at that for now. Just say these things are natural subatomic particles that are flying around us all the time, and we just don't know it. But when we detect more of these neutrons, the soil is dry, and we detect less of them, the soil is wet. And so just by monitoring these things flying around above the land surface, we can know how much water is in the soil. Now, the other piece of that, then, we know what's in the soil. Now we need to know our current crop status, and that's where the cameras come in. You can use satellite, you can use, all kinds of stuff to monitor your crop. But there is, the only thing that comes close to matching a human's two eyeballs out there is a camera. And so having that camera right over the crop, you can monitor day by day the growth of that crop. You can see that percent of canopy cover inching up day by day. You can see it going down when that crop starts to enter drought stress or to approach maturity. And so the problem is people don't make cameras for this purpose. So they make a lot of trail cameras. We've tried just about every trail camera that's on the market, I think. None of them are satisfactory for this purpose. And so this summer we've had a student basically starting from scratch and building our own camera system to optimize it for crop monitoring.
So as the only non-scientist here, I have to ask, how do you come up with these ideas of
cosmic rays?
Right. So
It sounds real cool.
it really does.
Awesome.
I mean, you're sitting around with other scientists, and you're thinking, how can we measure the soil moisture without actually putting a probe in the ground? Hey, I have an idea. Cosmic rays.
Yeah.
How do you make that jump?
Yeah.
As the only non-scientist at this table, I'm very interested in how you came up with that.
Don't worry, Dave. We said the same thing.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it's okay.
Well, that's a great question, and honestly, I think it's very much like how anybody learns anything. I don't think it's all that different for scientists, how they learn versus other people. This, number one, I didn't come up with it. I learned it from somebody else smarter than me. Okay, so that's how most of us learn stuff, right? So I learned it from somebody else, and that person learned it by failure. Okay, and so what they were trying to do was to monitor these cosmic ray neutrons and relate that to some geologic processes. Okay, they were studying something entirely different, and their data was so dang noisy it was giving them fits. Like, this data is not right. It's got all this noise in it, and every time it rains, my data goes up or down. And then somebody said, wait a second. And so that's when they realized the noise in their data was actually a signal that we could use to monitor soil moisture. And so they learned it by failure. They learned it by accident, you might say, providence, whatever you want to call that.
Well, as a side note, that's actually how the microwave was invented.
Yeah.
A guy had a Hershey bar in his pocket and was exposed to radiation, and next thing you know, he has a pocket full of melted chocolate, and it was by accident, and he was able to harness it, and now we have the microwave. So
same for the Post-it note, right?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Man.
Well, so on that one question, so with that system, you can monitor potentially the amount. Can you do like the Mesonet does at depth? Do you have any indication of depth, or is it just it's present right now?
For the soil moisture, the non-contact, this cosmic ray neutron device for monitoring soil moisture, it is sensitive to about the top 1 foot of the soil, and not a whole lot below that. And actually, the sensitivity changes a little bit with the moisture content, so it's a little bit more weighted to the shallow depths when it's wet. It senses a little bit deeper when it's dry, but you can roughly think of it as like the top foot, more or less, being what it's representing. And that's, of course, key, for the crops. Now, what's deep also matters, but when you talk about monitoring soil moisture at depth, it gets really
it's
tricky.
so exhausting, and that's what's so nice is putting probes in the ground. I like probes because they give you a lot of information, but going in and out of the ground all the time is that's what's nice.
Yeah, so there's a ton of potential for this, and there's a ton of potential for the images. So we have gone through, speaking out signal and noise, so we have 3 years of these photographs of winter wheat crops, 3 different sites. So Chattanooga, Chickasha, Bremen. Shout out to Roger Fisher and Patrick Curl for letting us work on their farms. But we have 3 growing seasons of these data at these sites, and we have 5 photographs per day of that crop. And so you can see that crop canopy, how it develops over time and how it goes down due to freeze events and so forth. But then we were looking at that like, man, some of this data is real noisy. Why is it that bouncing around so much? And you go in there, you look at those thousands of pictures one by one, and you see, oh, that's responding to frost. That's responding to water ponded on the surface. And so that's our next step. And what we're doing now is then you start to use those cameras and you recognize additional features beyond just the crop canopy cover. And there's a ton of potential there.
Yeah,
so that's the direction, one of the directions that we're headed now.
As we're wrapping up episode 113, I want to thank you for listening in on this conversation of the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. And if you would like to join the next conversation, go ahead and send us an email. It is podcast@reddirtagronomy.com, or send us a tweet. Our handle is reddirtag. We would like to thank Dr. Tyson Auctioner for joining us on the podcast today. And to find out more about him or any of our guests, along with any of the resources that we talked about today or any other day on the podcast, visit reddirtagronomy.com. There you will find show notes and you can listen to past episodes too. For Dr. Josh Lofton, Dr. Jason Warren, and Dr. Brian Arnell, I am Dave Deacon, and we want to thank you all for listening. The proceeding is a copyrighted recording of Ag Now Media, LLC, 2022. And yes, all rights are reserved.